Hey, Bills Mafia. We know there's only one topic every day. All Bills, all the time. And now Matt Bovee and Sal Capaccio are going really deep, talking Bills all year long, because it's always game day in Buffalo.
Well, how about this for a setup? I feel like we're back in the draft.
Yeah.
Remember we were at the draft and we were like doing it from inside the Bills media room and then outside the field house. We were inside the Bills field house, home of the Buffalo Bills, right over Matt's tall head there. You can see it. Matt Bovee, Sal Capaccio here. It's always game day in Buffalo. We just came in from watching practice on a Wednesday, even though it's kind of like a Tuesday when you lead up to a Monday night game, but it was the first practice of the week. What'd you take away from what Sean said and what we saw?
I think they're getting a little healthier. I think some of the guys you wanted to see out on the field, you did see on the field. There were some new injuries kind of added to the list. James Cook did not practice on Wednesday. Curtis Samuel did not practice today. Khalil Shakir did not practice. Did I say Saturday? Did not practice today. They did not practice on Wednesday. So none of those three guys practiced. However, all three of them were out on the field, and Khalil Shakir was actually doing a little bit of jogging. He was doing some agility drills. I think that's a good sign for the first practice of the week. As for the other two guys, it felt like those were more of day-to-day injuries. So I think as long as we see them sometime in the next 2 days, that's probably a good sign as the Bills get ready for the Jets.
Yeah, so the big news from Sean McDermott before we went out to practice was James Cook and Curtis Samuel both not practicing due to foot/toe. Let's start with Curtis Samuel because this has been an issue we've talked about where is it something that's been bothering him and why he's not being involved because he had the turf toe injury going back to training camp. And as I've always noted, we've talked about this. He's not on the injury report. Well, suddenly now he's on the injury report. So you wonder if that's something that has to do with that previous injury.
Yeah, maybe it's something that's been lingering a little bit. I mean, I don't think that would answer our questions about why this offense has not utilized him more or in more efficient ways. But maybe that is just a small piece of it. Maybe he's just not acclimated fully yet. Maybe they aren't using him as much as they should. And maybe he also happens to be a little bit banged up. But the thing that's interesting is with Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel not practicing on Wednesday, and then Matt Collins was in a red non-contacts jersey. Really, the only healthy wide receivers on the Bills roster practicing were Keon Coleman and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, already a position of weakness and now a position where they're also dealing with way too many injuries.
And then James Cook, also with a foot/toe, which is obviously you could not afford to not have James Cook on this roster. And I would say from the encouraging side, he was out on the stationary bike, and then I saw him actually off the stationary bike walking around on the practice field. He wasn't participating, but he was walking around, which is good news. On the, oh boy, is this something side, the Bills activated Darrington Evans off the injured reserve for designated return. So another running back they put coincidentally the same day that James Cook isn't practicing, that Darrington Evans, they only have 2 weeks to put him on the roster if they want to. Otherwise, he's not even going to be able to play this year.
Yeah, I didn't think that was that big of a deal.
3 weeks, excuse me.
I think if James Cook was not out there today, I would maybe be a bit more pessimistic, but he was out there and he was also hanging around the offense. Now, if you're listening to this, you would go, well, where else would he hang out? Usually that's an indication that they're trying to get up to speed on what the game plan is and what they're specifically working on during an individual practice. If there's no chance they're going to play, most of the time they're not hanging out there. They're just kind of watching on the sideline or probably not even on the field at all. So I do think if we put the pieces together, I'm not overly concerned about James Cook's status specifically for this week.
I'm also very encouraged about Taron Johnson. What we did see from Taron Johnson, even though he's limited in a red non-contact jersey, he actually was hitting a bag for the first time. We did not see him hitting a bag last week. No. And I'll go a step further. He was actually hitting a bag with a coach locking out his right arm on the bag because that's the arm that has the wrap on it. That's a very good sign.
I think Taron Johnson plays. I thought it was a coin flip that he could have potentially even maybe played last week. I think they just were like, listen, we've got an extra day rest after the Texans game. The Jets game is more important. It's a division game. Let's have him back ready for this. And I think that they were just trying to be a little bit overly cautious. But now I do think that we will see him. Terrell Bernard was also in a red non-contact jersey today. I just kind of feel like same thing. Like, let's ease these guys back into it. We'll use them in the actual games the way they need to be used. And then maybe we'll take it easy on them in practice for a couple weeks.
All right, let's talk about Josh Allen a little bit here. He is wearing, once again, the white glove, but he does not have his fingers taped. Once again, great sign. He didn't have his fingers taped for the first time in a game since injury at week 1 on Sunday against the Texans, but he still wore it all week in practice and, again, starts off this week in practice. Okay, we know that. there's been so much talk. I addressed this on the pod the other day when I was solo, Matt, and I talked about it on WGR Sports Radio 550 on Wednesday morning with Jeremy and Joe as well. I had no idea there was some sort of big controversy or whatever about Josh Allen and the tent and concussion protocol. So I'm just going to tell you, in case you didn't hear what I say, I'm going to give you my Cliff's Notes. I'm on the field, everyone. I am the sideline reporter on the Bills Radio Network. My job is literally to watch what's going on with this stuff. Josh Allen was taken to the tent by the independent neurologist with a red cap on. He was cleared to play by the independent neurologist with the red cap on. Smelling salts are very common in the NFL. Guys use them all the time. Whatever conspiracy theory you want to have out there, whatever you want to write out there, whatever assumption you want to make, stop playing Twitter doctor, stop playing television, watching on TV doctor, and understand Josh Allen went through the concussion protocol and was cleared to play.
I went back and looked at my notes because I saw the same thing pop up on Tuesday morning of just people saying that they did not go through the process correctly or that they did something wrong. A couple things here. First off, I'm not naive enough to realize that some of that stuff happens in the NFL. However, I do not think the team that had Damar Hamlin die on the field would be taking shortcuts with any sort of medical situation going on, especially with the face of their franchise quarterback. In my notes, he was in the blue medical tent for about 4.5 minutes from the time that he went in to the time that he went out. Now, you noticed this, you were down on the field. When they forced the turnover, he tried to get out of the tent.
That's correct. That's a great point. And they wouldn't let him out.
And so I think from what I was told and from what I was watching, now obviously I'm up in the press box, I can't hear what he was saying, but there's photographers and there's other media members that are down on the field. When they forced the turnover and the Bills were getting the ball back, apparently he was like, I'm getting back onto the field, turned around and ran out. And then the doctors caught him and brought him back into the field for what I'm assuming is to the tent to try and basically finish this sort of evaluation. And then there's the commercial break between that. And then he ends up missing a play. So I know that this has got some noise and some attention, but I don't think there's much more there than, what we've already just kind of discussed here.
Sean McDermott was asked about it Monday. He said Josh was cleared. He's not in the concussion protocol. On Wednesday, Josh was not on the injury report with any of those injuries that we were aware of. He wasn't limited in any. He could be on the injury report. I shouldn't say that. On Thursday, that'll be the first one with the hand. Could be with the chest. Could be with the ankle.
Yeah.
But he's not limited in any capacity, at least from what Sean McDermott told us. So hopefully that answers everybody's question. And one more on this. I was asked a couple times, why didn't the Bills just call timeout and give him more time? They didn't know he'd come back.
Yeah.
You call timeout and he doesn't come back, you waste the timeout.
Yeah.
So they had to just kind of play the game in the moment right there.
One other injury update, because this is not something that we've really talked about specifically on the podcast because the injury happened late. But another day of no practice for Ed Oliver today.
That's right. That's right.
He is not on the field. And if we've learned anything, hamstring injuries are weird. They can be tricky. So I am a little curious about what his long-term outlook looks like. Now, I will say this, because the injury happened at practice last week on Thursday, if the team thought that this was going to be a long-term issue, they would have put him on IR before the Texans game and not waited till now. So that to me doesn't make me think, okay, it's going to be a month injury, but no practice on Wednesday, not even on the field. I think it's a pretty realistic chance that he does not play against the Jets on Monday. I mean, we just saw Nico Collins go on the injured reserve because of a hamstring injury. Sometimes these linger. So I think the Bills might be without Ed Oliver for at least another week or two.
Okay. The team they're playing this week will be without their head coach. They will have a head coach, but not the one they've had, Robert Saleh. Your reaction to the firing of Robert Saleh and how that might impact Monday night's game?
I don't like it for the Bills because I am of the belief that there is usually a bit of a boost when you make a move like that, because I think it actually holds the players a bit accountable of going, well, he lost his job because we are not doing a good enough job. And I think given the Jets' 2-game losing streak, the fact that it's in New York, the fact that this has been a team the Bills have struggled with, it feels like it's kind of the perfect storm of, okay, maybe the Jets show up and give the Bills a really, really tough game, or a tougher game than maybe some people are ultimately expecting. I was surprised with the move because I didn't think it was going to happen after week 5. I thought maybe it would happen after the season if they ultimately missed the playoffs. But it's incredible. I mean, if the Jets win this game, they're in first place in the AFC East. And they fired their coach 2 days ago. So, I mean, clearly desperate times call for desperate measures, and they probably just had enough. And, I know we talk about Aaron Rodgers on this podcast because of the story and the shove and everything. I think that there was probably some involvement, but I don't think this was like an Aaron Rodgers decision.
Just before we did this, Aaron Rodgers was on the Pat McAfee show. Yeah. He asked him specifically, and Aaron said, I resent the implication. I had nothing to do with it. He had a lot of glowing things to say about Robert Saleh. I'll say this. I'm gonna take his side of this part of it, which is I don't think Aaron Rodgers called Woody Johnson and said you got to fire him. I don't think Woody Johnson asked Aaron Rodgers, do you think I should fire him? I don't think Aaron Rodgers did the firing here. What I do think, though, is this whole thing was a problematic issue in the organization in some level between Aaron Rodgers, Robert Saleh, not seeing eye to eye, not respecting each other, some of the things we've seen on TV. I just think that there's always been a bad kind of vibe that's going on there. We've never really seen Aaron Rodgers come out with full on support of Robert Saleh either up until now and after he was fired. So as much as that may be correct, he didn't have anything to necessarily directly do with it. Well, look, you still got Aaron Rodgers to try and win here, and the coach isn't winning. You're not going to fire Aaron Rodgers. He's still going to be a part of it.
I just think that the Jets organization, not from top to bottom, because they've got a really good defense. And honestly, it's been a team the Bills have struggled against. But you go out and you get this quarterback and you basically give him the keys to the car. And it has not worked. Like, what are we doing? Like, why would they try and trade for Davante Adams? Do they really think that they're a Super Bowl team if they can go get Davante Adams? What does Aaron Rodgers have left? How many more years is this guy playing? And does he even want to continue to play after what we've seen so far in 5 games? Maybe he will get better, but I just think given the keys to a guy who has been with your organization for 2 years and played 6 games, 5 games and 4 plays is just absurd. This is not a franchise quarterback who has earned the right to kind of pull the strings here. This is a guy who you signed at the end of his career. Like, if they didn't do this for Brett Favre, or at least I don't remember them doing this for Brett Favre, it doesn't make sense to me.
The one thing I'll give the Jets credit for is they're trying to go all in to break their drought, and they're doing what they can. But when you go all in, that means you're going to be all out if it doesn't work, right? And listen, if they don't make the playoffs this year, we all knew going into the year that most likely Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas would be fired, which, by the way, Woody Johnson comes out after the firing and goes, this is the most talented team we've had in years. That's a huge endorsement for Joe Douglas. And I don't even know if that's true. They have some talented players. I think their O-line is still suspect. I think that they still have some depth issues on defense, as good as the starting 11 are, but we'll see where it goes. Speaking of their O-line being suspect, I think that's where the Bills have to win this game. I still see a 40-year-old who is not really wanting to run that much. He can be a little bit mobile, but he's been getting beat up a lot. And I think the Bills D-line has to control this game.
And that's what I'm worried about for the Bills, because their defensive line has been incredibly inconsistent. And I don't think that they have lived up to the expectations we had. Now, you throw in the Smoot injury at the beginning of the year, you throw in the Von Miller suspension, now game 2 of that. They are a bit more decimated than we thought they would be. There were times when the defensive line flashed in the last game against the Texans, but it was not nearly consistent enough. I mean, there was the Smoot forced fumble that really changed the game. But, you know, like, where's Greg Rousseau been? Where's A.J. Epinesa been? I'm not indicating that these are not good players. Greg Rousseau has 3 sacks in the first game and really hasn't done anything significant since then. They need to get home, and they need to get home more often, even without Ed Oliver. Like, Ed Oliver had a really good game, I believe, against the Dolphins, but then really did not do much against the Ravens in that game, right? So they need some interior pressure. I think that, was Austin Johnson back at practice today?
Limited.
So that's a good sign. I thought Dwayne Carter did a pretty nice job against the Texans the other night, but they need their defensive line to be more dominant, because if they're not, teams will have a chance to pick apart the middle of the field, because they're not going to test the Bills safeties, or excuse me, they're not going to test the Bills corners. They're going to test the Bills safeties, and they're going to test, the last couple of weeks, it's been Cam Lewis and Dorian Williams and insert player here.
Okay, the other issue obviously has been popping up the last couple of weeks, the wide receiver talk, separation, lack thereof by the wide receivers. This has been an issue. And what's happening is there's been some data that's out there now, and this is something that we've talked about, and it's being shown in the data. Teams are playing the Bills man-to-man a lot more. Not something we expected to see, Matt, because Josh Allen's been terrific against man-to-man, because when you turn your back to him and you're following a receiver, he just runs. He should have ran a couple of times on Sunday, by the way, to get a first down. He did not do that. Teams are playing the Bills man-to-man because they're saying, you can't beat us man-to-man for 3 to 4 seconds. And while we do that, we're going to pressure the heck out of your quarterback. And he's going to have to make a quick decision. And if he doesn't, he's going to have to scramble. And that's going to force him into a tougher position. And we're going to hit him. It's all happening here to the Bills. And until they figure that out somehow, who's it on to figure it out? Is it on the wide receivers just to be better at their job? Is it on Joe Brady to scheme them open? Is it on Brandon Beane to get some help?
Everybody. It's on everybody, right? The man-to-man stuff, I think, is really happening because the wide receivers aren't getting separation, and they're not doing it quick enough. There are times when they are separating, but it is too late into the play, and usually at that point, the line has either not held up or Josh has started to scramble, and he's got to make a decision before he runs out of bounds.
Can I make one point on that? It's a great thing you just brought up.
Yeah.
Early enough. I've had a lot of people say, well, that's why you should have drafted a really fast guy. No. We're not talking about getting down the field separating. We're talking about separating within the first 5 to 10 yards. Cole Beasley was the best at this. Sure. You get to a spot, you turn around, you move your body to separate from someone. That's what they're lacking, not the speed down the field separation.
They're lacking a Khalil Shakir, who we do imagine will probably be back either this week or the following week. I think he does cover up some things because he is a pretty good separator, but it is still an issue for this team. I think Brandon Beane needs to get somebody who kind of takes everybody and knocks them down one notch. I think if you're going to go with your base offense, I don't think that Mac Hollins should be on the field every play. I know what he does in the run game. I understand all of that, but I think it should be somebody that they can go find that can replace Mac Hollins, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. That should buy him, and then Dalton Kincaid. That should kind of be your base set offense here. So I think that they need to add somebody, and I think they will. I think Josh needs to take a little bit more of what the defense is giving him, whether that's stuff underneath or scrambling. There were multiple times in that game where it was like, Josh, why don't you just run? But he's also got that little voice in the back of his head of, stop relying on the run so much. Stop taking so many hits. Like, make your receivers make plays. So I don't know if it's a little bit of everything kind of piecing it all of itself together, but this is something that they absolutely need to figure out. What's interesting, though, is the Jags played a bit more man against them than they were anticipating, and they picked them apart. And then 2 weeks later, now they are having an issue beating man coverage.
I agree with that. And I'm wondering, going back, is it just because the Jags just didn't have the right guys? Those were also at home, by the way. And I do think it matters being in a different environment. This, the cadences and people talk about motion, all those things kind of matter, but maybe the Jags just didn't have the right personnel. All right. Before we head out of here, we're here for another several minutes. Interesting today, something that Sean McDermott said I want to get your take on, because since it happened on Wednesday when he talked to the media at noon, we've had a lot of people kind of on social media responding to this. And basically he was asked specifically, do you, in a situation where like Robert Saleh here is fired by the New York Jets, would you call that coach up and ask him for intel on the team he's playing? Sean McDermott's response was, I'm going to read you his quote. I wouldn't do that. It's not in my nature or what I believe in. I wouldn't put a person in that position. End quote. He did say it does happen in the league. Mm-hmm. We have had people on both sides here respond and say, there's the side of, hey, I get that. It's a character thing. You don't do that to somebody. There's a lot of other people saying, what are you talking about? You're here to win games. That's a killer. That's a, loser mentality, or a killer instinct mentality or something. What do you think?
That's a tricky thing. I think if you have
a loaded question, I know.
I think if you have a previous relationship with somebody or a really close relationship with somebody, the conversation might be a bit different. But I also don't think that you should be the one seeking it out. Like, I think that, let's say something happens to, who's a good example of this? I don't want to say Brian Dable because it felt like there was friction with Brian Dable and Sean McDermott. Give me like a Leslie Frazier, right? Like,
who knows what that relationship even is, so right?
Maybe it's
either way.
Maybe it's a former coordinator who things ended on a good term with, and they ended up getting a better job. Then they ultimately lose their job. If they reach
out, Ron Rivera,
sure, and they reach out and they're like, hey, like this, we struggle against man, or like we do this, like just something to keep in the back pocket here. I think that's one thing, but I think it would be really slimy if Sean called, Robert Saleh and was like.
So you agree with him?
I agree with him. Yes, I think.
Okay, I do too, because here's what I'll say. I've never coached in the NFL. I've been around coaches my whole life. I've coached high school football at a high state, high level in Florida. And I will tell you, there are very, very competitive people I've been around that have done this their whole lives. And there are people who would do this, but for the most part, it's kind of unspoken that you don't do that, because you have the respect for that person who just is going through this situation in their life, right? Yeah. It's about that too. Like Sean said, I'm not going to put him in that position. It's more about, that's what it's about to me. Like, why would you do that to the other person? That's incredibly selfish if you do something like that, as far as I'm concerned. Robert Saleh just lost his job. Yeah. If Sean McDermott called him tomorrow and goes, hey, buddy, you just lost your job. Why don't you help me beat the team? It sounds really scummy to me, to be quite honest with you, right? You don't do that. Now, if Robert Saleh picked up the phone and called Sean McDermott and said, hey, you know what? I'm really, really upset about how this went down. Let me tell you a few things about maybe how you guys can kind of get them this week. I'd like you to do that. I don't think he hangs up.
No.
Right? He doesn't hang up.
No.
I agree. Anybody out there wants to say, there goes Sal again defending Sean McDermott. Whatever. Here's Matt defending him too on this. This is about character to me. This is about the right thing to do and how to treat people and have respect for people in their lives as human beings. And I think that would be incredibly selfish and disrespectful.
I think it depends on who picks up the phone. I think if the other person is picking up the phone, you would be dumb to not listen 100%. And take into account what they have to say. But if there's not any sort of previous relationship, like I'm sure Sean and Robert Saleh, as defensive-minded head coages who have been in the same division, know each other from a surface level standpoint, but probably not to the level that Sean would pick up the phone and call him and be like, hey, buddy, how do I beat the team that just fired you? I bet you'd love to see that. I agree with you. I think that that's slimy. But
and by the way, I guarantee you, Robert Saleh has a lot of friends in that building still. He doesn't, but it's not. He might be met. Oh, you don't think? I guarantee he has relationships and friends in the building still. People that he would not want to do that to.
This is where, yes, but unless he's a better person than a lot of that I am, if I was the head coach of the New York Jets and I got fired, I would want to see them fail miserably.
Sure.
Even though you have friends in the building.
I get it.
This is no different than if you went and worked for a competitor of what you do in any other industry. You would want to beat them. Robert Saleh is going to watch this game on Monday and want the Bills to win by 30 points.
Robert Saleh is probably going to have a media job, in no time because, he's very good. It doesn't give you all the answers, but he's very good, in front of a camera. And he's going to probably be a defensive coordinator next year once again. He's going
to be the 49ers defensive coordinator next year.
Probably right. But I agree. I wouldn't do that. Now, I would say if it's a player, I do think it's different. Players are way different. When players get released, sometimes you bring them in on workouts and you're like, hey, by the way, what do you do? Hey, look, I mean, the Dolphins released Mike White. The Bills brought him in. They didn't play him right away, but you think that he wasn't helping the Bills with intel? Of course. I mean, he's on your team now, right? So
I don't think Jordan Poyer was helping the Dolphins
with intel
on the Bills.
Of course. So I do think it's a little different with a player, but I'm going to say I do think that it's the right thing not to do, as Sean McDermott said. What are we leaving on the bone? Anything here?
I mean,
anything going on in the league? You want to discuss?
No, not specifically. Are
the Chiefs as good as their record?
Yeah, they are. I mean,
I don't think they are.
Really?
I think they played a really great game the other day. I think they're a very good team. I mean, Atlanta should have beat them. Baltimore should have beat them. They won those games. I give them credit. You are what your record says you are, as Bill Parcells says. Here's the better question. I'll phrase it this way. I don't know how sustainable it is given their situation with their injuries, continuing to win like this.
I will never write off the team that has the best quarterback in the NFL. I know you're not writing them off, but they have the best quarterback in the NFL. They have the best head coach in the NFL, one of the best head coaches, and one of the best defenses in the NFL. How could they not be good? How could they not win more games? I really, like we said, a lot of people have been on Sean McDermott this week, and I do not think it's always fair to just say, hey, everything's fine. He got them to this point. I really liked the Colin Cowherd analogy that he had about how at the end of a game, Andy Reid is like a life jacket, and Sean McDermott at times feels like a dumbbell, where it's like a kettlebell, weighing them down as opposed to keeping you afloat. And I do think that there is legitimacy to that. So I think that when you have all of those pieces, you're going to be really good, and you're going to be able to figure it out. You watch that game. You watch the Saints game. Some of their guys are so open. I understand Patrick Mahomes is a marvelous player, but with all of the injuries they have, Travis Kelce should not be 20 yards open. And there are times when he is, and that's coaching. That's good players too, but more of that is coaching. I watch so many of these games because the Bills have so many weird scheduled games now on Red Zone where there are just guys wide open. I legitimately can't remember the last time a Bills player just had a wide open gimme touchdown. Think about it. If you're listening to this episode, think about when's the last time the Bills just had a play action pass where just a guy was completely wide open, that it didn't require Josh running around and trying to.
I guess you'd have to go back to James Cook, but he had to run it in the end zone against Miami on that fourth down. Yeah, he caught it, but he had to run it in, but he was so wide open. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was so wide open, but I mean, at the same time, he was at the 19-yard line. It's not like he was right. And so it feels like with the Chiefs, it happens all the time. And I think that's coaching. And then it's a combination of having a great coach and having really good players.
All right. Want to thank Mike Robier for producing. We want to ask you once again to please download, subscribe, give us a nice review, a rating. We got a brand new logo. You'll see it. It's always Game Day in Buffalo. Wherever you pod, it looks really good.
Oh, can I give a shout out? Shout out to Quentin Morris's father, I believe. He came up to me on the sideline in Houston and basically said, like, he listens to the podcast.
Yeah.
He was like, don't, he basically said hi, and just so, hi, thanks for listening. We appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. Really appreciate that. See, you can listen just like Q Morris's dad as well. You can also, by the way, go to the Sal Sports YouTube page. That's where you'll see us. You'll see that home of the Buffalo Bills behind us. If Matt's head isn't covering it, there you go. Ducked out. There you go. We're inside the field house today as we're getting ready to go back into the locker room a little bit later today to hear from Bills players. You'll get a lot more on the Sal Sports YouTube channel as well. We'll talk to you next time, and it's always Game Day in Buffalo.